Okay, well, thank you everybody for taking a few minutes to join us today. The main thing that we wanted to discuss today is the fact that we've got a couple of new gateways that we've introduced recently, and we have a couple more that are pending. So our equipment stack is quickly growing to the point where we're going to have, I think, 6 gateways and some new access points and new switches. So we wanted to discuss the new products we have, and then, of course, where everything fits in. So again, thank you for taking some time to join us today, and we will be making this video available after the fact if you do want to review it or share it with anybody else. So as we go, if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer section. That might be the easiest place to put them, but I do have the chat open as well. And so from here, I will turn it over to Tom. So Tom.
Excellent. Thank you, Corey, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning, afternoon. So let's see. So as Corey mentioned, we've been introducing new products lately, and in particular, there's a bunch more new hardware capabilities or hardware platforms that we've introduced. And one of the questions that Corey's been getting frequently from a lot of partners is just exactly how do you suggest picking an appropriate gateway or an AP or a switch or so on for out of this new collection for a customer? And of course, every partner has his or her method that they go about quoting a customer for a project. But I mean, we just have an overall recommendation first, and then I'll get into the nuts and bolts of the actual hardware, what the capabilities are, and so on. What we typically suggest is first select the gateway, because the gateway, in a sense, is dictated by the size of the office, the number of employees, how much storage you need, what kind of throughput is required, what sort of WAN ports are available, that sort of stuff. So that's kind of the core of the recommendation. And then based on the recommendation of the gateway, then you would end up with the rest of the LAN hardware. So the next step in the process ideally should be to figure out the number of and type of APs that you would need. And I think pretty much every project we dealt with has Wi-Fi. They don't necessarily have up-level Wi-Fi. That's not a requirement. They could use Wi-Fi from any vendor, but they all have Wi-Fi, and choosing the APs is useful as a next step, because once you pick the APs, then you end up with also the drivers for the LAN infrastructure. And the number of APs that you would choose and where you put them and all that is all based on square footage, employees that are going to be using Wi-Fi, the amount of coverage that you need or the customer needs, and also, just as importantly, the customer is willing to pay for. And finally, picking the number and the size of the LAN switches, because now that you have the APs that you need picked out, you know how many drops are going to be required for the APs. Then you can also add in the drops for things like phones and wired workstations and so on. Add a fudge factor to make sure that they will be able to grow, and that gives you the number of LAN switches. So this is a reasonably straightforward selection process, but over the years, I have noticed that it is very easy for partners in the heat of attempting to quote a project to skip one or two of these steps, and then there's an uncomfortable conversation with the customer thereafter going, oops, I forgot that. All right, so that's the basic process of selection that we would recommend. I think pretty much everyone would go through that. I'm just putting that down on paper so that we get that out of the way. So now we go to the first step, which is picking a gateway. Formerly, it was really easy to pick a gateway. There was one. So this is the gateway. You can have any color that you want as long as as long as the white. Now there are the choices have expanded considerably. So we started out with the white box in the top right, the UG101, and there's well over 1,000 installations of that all over the US. And now we then after that introduced the 204 for the right at the start of the pandemic. That was the Soho Gateway. Then last year we added in the 206 Pro and the 208 Max, and these are new higher performance gateways. And with this collection of gateways, we can now span the gamut of pretty much any business that could be classified as a small business. And so the rated capacities are from 1 to 1,000 employees. They can take WAN bandwidths all the way up to gigabit fiber. And for the big guys, even 2 gig fiber. They can do DPI firewall performance all the way beyond saturating a gig link and VPN to match. And we are adding in 10 gig SFP ports on the 206 variant. I'll talk about that. And then they also expanded the storage capabilities. Used to be just 1 or 5, and now it's like up to 8 terabytes. A quick comparison table to highlight the differences between these gateways before we go into how to pick one of these. So the 204 is our smallest one. It is designed with no storage. It's too small to have storage, actually. And it has a relatively small number of ports. There's 4 ports. All of our gateways, by the way, have dual WAN ports. So that is something that is there everywhere. So if you have 2 WAN links, plug them in, and we fail over or load balance as you want. The little guy has no storage, as I mentioned, pretty moderate throughput for deep packet inspection. And we suggest, in the 1 to 25 employee range. The 101 is the gateway we've had for years now. It's our workhorse mid-range, and it has quite a lot more LAN ports, which is handy in environments where you would like to dispense with a switch or 2. A lot of people actually find that they can get by without any switches in an environment that's primarily Wi-Fi using this gateway. Has about 5 terabytes storage max and moderate throughput, and we suggest it for no more than about 99 or so employees. The 206 is a recent introduction. It has dual WAN and 4 LAN ports, but it expands up to 8 terabytes of storage. And if you're going to put 8 terabytes of storage, we think it's a really, really good idea to do RAID. So all of the expanded storage options have RAID. And yes, it has significantly higher throughput than any of the other 2. In fact, five times better. So it's recommended for up to about 200-ish employees in an office. The 207, by the way, is a variant of the 206 that adds 2 10 gig SFP ports to the gateway. And we have an 10 gig SFP switch that we're also introducing as part of the 4.4 release. And so the intent is for people with more LAN infrastructure, they can actually build a 10 gig SFP, a stacked SFP backplane. But the rest of the capabilities on the 207 are very similar to the 206. And then there's a 208, which is the elephant. It's quite large. It has 6 LAN ports, but it has probably twice the overall capability or performance capability that a 207 has. And it does actually offer in the future for us to be able to add more storage options, but for now it has the same storage options as the 207. And we designed it to support offices with up to 1,000 employees. I think the largest right now we have is something over 400 users in a single building. All right, so we didn't just pick these gateways randomly. We actually picked them after looking at what our typical customer mix is in our customer base today. So I looked around and said, okay, what are partners using our systems for? And so that's where these actually came from. So the 204 was in response to the pandemic, as I mentioned. I mean, so everyone was having remote workers, so they needed something that was good for home use. But we also discovered that it is very nice for a really small office. So in a really small office, you probably don't have a wiring closet. Stuff is just sitting out in the open somewhere. So it had to be really tiny. So that 204 is actually about the size of your palm. and it couldn't make any noise, so it has no fence. But it has all the capabilities of the other gateway, just lower performance, and it's actually very good for a SOHO remote worker environment. The 101 is, as I mentioned, our workhorse mid-range, and it fits most of the small business offices. You know, if you've got a 25 person office or a 50-person office, the 101 fits quite nicely. And by the way, we are introducing or going to be introducing a new 205 mid-range with higher performance to complement the 101 for cases where the 101 is good, but you really need something a little bit more powerful. The 206, as I noted, was for a larger number of users. And so we found people wanting to put the 101 into cases where there were significantly more users during the day. A school is a good example. I mean, a school would have, 200 users. All of them are usually on the internet doing their schoolwork. And so they need significantly more performance. A church is another example. If you got a case where the network infrastructure goes down every Sunday, that's probably because 200 parishioners are coming in and they all want to watch the sermon or streaming video. And so that brings down the whole network. So the 206 is a great case for that. And the 208 is because we noted that we were starting to go into the much larger segment. And in fact, it almost just barely fits as a small business product. Really, there aren't, when you get up to 1,000 users, it's not a small business anymore. So, but you can cover that with the 2.8. Okay, so given that these are the gateways we have available, so what's a strategy for selecting between the gateways? So it's actually, there's a lot of different dimensions you can go on. You could try performance, you could look for storage, you could look for just, look at the number of Ethernet drops, all that kind of stuff. But really, I think the simplest way of looking at which gateway you want to select is just go in and see how many employees they have in their office. And that is, we find that's a good proxy for a lot of things. So the amount of performance you need, the storage you need, what kind of network infrastructure is going to be there, etc. So if you got 10 or less people in the office, it's very likely to be mostly Wi-Fi. It's very unlikely to be running Active Directory. And then typically they're all on cloud apps, so there's not a whole lot of storage. The 204 is a very good fit for that. If you step up to, say, an office with 25 or 50 people, now at this point, you're going to require some decent storage or performance, and probably there's going to be a fair number of wired devices you can run across, and that's where the 101 would generally fit. But that office is still price conscious, so you run something in the mid-range, not in the high end. Of course, if you have more than 60 to 100 people, then you're probably going to end up with a 206, just because at that point, you're probably going to end up turning on some of the features. And in addition, people are probably going to be doing loading up the network quite a bit during the day. So at that point, you need something that's higher performance. And certainly, we wouldn't suggest putting 100 people on a 101. And finally, the 2.8, well, if you got something, it's like, well, this really needs a seriously large size firewall, then yes, the 208 is there. A caveat is that, every small business is different. I mean, there may be in fact, there was actually an office that we ran into where they only had about 15 people, but everyone was doing video editing. At that point, it was very clear that the 101 wasn't going to cut it. So a 206 was the one that we recommended. So if you have questions about specific customers, you're like, oh, this doesn't quite fit in these neat little buckets, well, give us a call. We'd be happy to help walk through the selection process and make a recommendation for you. I think the key is to make the recommendation before you make a quote to the customer, because once you make a quote to the customer, it seems to be almost set in concrete. Okay, so that's the gateway selection that we have and what we suggest in terms of a thought process for selecting between the gateways. Now we come to Wi-Fi, and so Wi-Fi is a whole lot more painful than any wired or firewall technology. So let's get to that. So right now we have a selection of 3 different access points. One is our standard dual radio MIMO Wi-Fi 5 access points, which we still ship, but we last year introduced a new Wi-Fi 6 access point, which is also dual radio and 2x2 MIMO, but significantly higher performance. And then we also have a dual radio MIMO Wi-Fi 5 outdoor access point. So now where we used to have just 1 or 2, now we have 3. Okay, selecting an AP. Now that's a wholly different question. So I think the easiest part of the selection process is selecting between the indoor and outdoor APs. And that's like easy. You just, if you're indoors, choose an indoor AP. If you're outdoors, choose an outdoor AP. That's kind of just stating the obvious right there. That's the simple part. The rest of the process almost resembles magic. So how many APs do you need? Well, kind of depends. Where should you mount them? Well, on the ceiling or walls, but the rest of it kind of depends. What sort of power, what sort of configuration should be set up? Well, the power and channel settings are kind of, it depends. The only constant is that in the beginning, the customer may be delighted, and then after about 2 or 3 months, you're probably going to get someone going, the Wi-Fi isn't quite as good. So I've never seen a Wi-Fi setup where the customer at one point through the years didn't complain at one time or the other. So we've been, in the large enterprise side, I've dealt with a whole lot of Wi-Fi deployments, the large enterprise side with sometimes up to thousands of APs in an environment. I think the biggest I ever saw was at a stadium in Dallas, where they ended up with something close to 5,000 access points through the stadium. And the large enterprise way of selecting an AP is to go spend lots and lots of money on tools, site survey, software, all kinds of stuff, do a full-up site survey, build heat maps, place the APs, pull all the cable, get the stuff configured for the best coverage, and users will complain. The small business way is usually driven on dollars. So you walk in, you see how big the office is, ask the customer how much they're willing to spend, put as many APs as you can, usually in places where there are drops, because if you say I need to pull a cable, they're like, well, that's going to cost $500. That's more than the cost of the AP. And so you're kind of limited in the small business side. But still, there are a few rules of thumb you could follow to pick the AP without actually causing pain and suffering down the road. What we typically suggest is you really should look at the floor plan, because if it's, it may be still a small office, but the floor plan is everything. So for a small office, 1,000 square feet, you can walk in, you can look around and go, it looks kind of squarish, and you can put an AP or 2 here and here, and it should cover the whole space. If it's a larger office, 2,000 square feet or more, sometimes you get some really wacky looking floor plans. I mean, I've seen L-shaped floor plans, H-shaped floor plans, U-shaped floor plans, and they all require more APs than simply the square footage. So it is often difficult to find, to get a floor plan given to you, but the fire marshal, for example, requires that you put up a floor plan, which is the exit map. And so even that is better than nothing. So what you do with that is count up the square footage, look for odd-looking walls. Somebody's put a row of file cabinets. Well, this is going to be a problem. And then, take a look at the environment. And then after that, usually we recommend, as a general rule of thumb, that you have at least 1 access point for every 2,000 square feet. That's just a, wet finger rule of thumb, because trying to cover more than 2,000 square feet with 1 access point is certainly possible, but it's could be problematic depending upon what kind of materials you have indoors. The other thing that a lot of people forget is that APs, an AP will only support a single radio channel on each radio. And if you put more than 10 or 20 people on a radio channel, you're going to have a problem when they all try to conflict with each other on the air. So the other thing to do is to look around and see how many employees there are with Wi-Fi devices, and everyone can employee could be counted on to have at least 2 or 3 Wi-Fi devices. And we've noticed that modern Wi-Fi devices are always hitting the Wi-Fi. If you have a phone in your pocket, it's pretty darn active. So at least one access point for every 10 to 20 people in the office is a good rule of thumb. And then you may have a large space. Well, I would strongly suggest just budgeting, not necessarily ordering, but just budgeting for an extra AP or two, because sometimes you install the APs where you have drops, and then you discover that there's the break room or something which has lousy coverage, and they're complaining about it. So that's when you come out like a hero, because you're budgeted for the AP and you can just install one and off you go. In most cases, you're limited to the drops on hand, but sometimes you can actually pull cable. That's great. So then give us a call and we can suggest, based on the floor plan, where you would best be able to site APs. We routinely help partners with Wi-Fi deployments. We've got a fair amount of experience with it. So don't hesitate to give us a call. We'd be happy to recommend both the type of APs and the location of the APs. It is also true that we've sometimes recommended placing an outdoor AP inside, and that is because the outdoor AP has more powerful radios, it has much better antennas, and it has much better range. And so sometimes an outdoor AP can actually get the signal through where an indoor AP is failing, because it just, I mean, an indoor AP is supposed to look pretty. It's not necessarily supposed to work well. So sometimes if the customer goes, well, I really need the coverage, then here's an outdoor AP that looks kind of like a hedgehog, but it actually works. So they're usually willing to go for it. All right, the last item on the list is Ethernet. And thank goodness, Ethernet is probably the most straightforward thing there is. Count up the number of ports and figure out how many PoE devices you need to feed, and you have Ethernet. But we still have a fairly large collection of Ethernet switches. There's 2 different 8-port switches now, a small guy and a rack-mountable regular 8-port switch. Then 24 ports. We also now will be having 2 different 24-port switches, one with 1 gig uplinks and 1 gig with 10 gig uplinks, and then 48-port. One thing we're trying to do to make it easy for selecting is to make all the switches have very similar capabilities. So every one of the switches is PoE capable on every port. That's RJ45, of course, except for the uplink ports. Every one of the switches can drive a phone or AP on every port. So you don't have to go, well, only ports 1 through 8 are PoE and the rest of the ports are not. And in fact, you can plug in an AP on every single port and we'll light up all the APs and drive them all. So you don't have to actually worry about whether the power budget is big enough. So we've picked the switches to make sure that they can power PoE on every single port. So all of the switches have SFP ports. We find ourselves getting into inter-building fiber more and more these days. And so having those SFP ports is very nice, including the smallest switch of them all. They all have SFP ports that are usable for uplinks and downlinks. And so you never have to worry about whether there's going to be a fiber drop. Just plug in your SFP module and off you go. And all of the switches run the same firmware. They all look identical on the portal, just have different numbers of ports. And so plug them in, they show up on the portal, and off you go. We do suggest, as a rule of thumb, that you budget for some spare ports, because it is very common to discover after you go in, install, you rack and stack the switches, plug in all the stuff, then somebody goes, oh, we need to add these, and you have no more switch ports left. So this would be, I mean, in the enterprise world, we used to go, well, if the switch is 50% full, then we need to rack another switch in there. But in the small business world, I think 25% is much less, much more usable margin. One of the things we would suggest is to try and avoid chains of switches, because that just leads to issues with somebody unplugged a switch by accident and suddenly the whole building went dark. This isn't a very good idea. And shorter chains are also better performance, because you have less of this forwarding from switch to switch to switch. That being said, Ethernet, as I said, is the simplest of the lot. And so we have the switches needed for you to scope out your your proposal, and we should be able to satisfy the range from 8 to 48 ports without any issues. All right, to wrap up. So we now have a wide selection of hardware. I think, as you noted, we have 4 or actually 5 different gateways with another one coming up pretty soon. So that will be 6 different gateways to choose from. We have 3 different access points to choose from, and 5 different switches. So the hardware is there. So basically, this is now for you to use as you need to satisfy your customer needs. So start with the gateway, add the switches and access points as you need them. It doesn't have to, like I said, it doesn't have to be up-level switches or APs, but the selection process is the same, whether you use up-level, you use third-party devices or better, or anything else. I mean, we have no problem helping you make the whole setup work. If you choose to use third-party equipment that your customer already has installed gear that they need to retain. So that's not a particular issue. And as always, if you have a proposal layout you're looking for help for, we are here. All right, now I will pass it back to Corey for questions, comments, anything that I forgot to cover.
Sure. Yeah. First question came in a few minutes ago, so hopefully we didn't get too far past this one. But question was customer with sub 25 users with Eric. I didn't write it down completely, so please rephrase the question if I missed this. But 25 less than 25 users with 1 gig or 1 terabyte NAS and a gigabit connection. So where would we recommend they start with that application?
But we have quite a number of customers in that, and that would be the 101, because I mean the 1 terabyte storage is pretty much a 101 and up territory. We recommend the 101 because it can sustain up to about 920 odd megabits per second if you don't turn on all the firewall features. But if your customer needs all the firewall features turned on, IDS, IPS, country filtering, etc., all of that running at the same time, then it'd be a 206. But in most cases, it's a 101. And in fact, in our office, we have symmetric 1 gig fiber links, and we have a 101 sitting in our office. Again, I mean, we believe in eating our own dog food to keep ourselves honest. And I do run speed tests on that 101 periodically just to make sure that our firmware is still up to snuff. And I do get in excess of 900 meg on a good day out of that 101 on our symmetric fiber link. So it can certainly do the job. But if you're going to turn on all the firewall features, or you're going to have Active Directory with 25 users and people are hammering the storage all the time, you might consider the 206. But a 101 is really where that 25-person office fits.
Okay, this I think this particular application Eric mentioned was in a HIPAA environment, so I don't know if that would change anything with maybe IDS, IPS, that sort of thing being activated.
Not necessarily. I mean, most cases, we do have a large number of medical clinics that are using the 101 with HIPAA agreements signed with Uplevel. They do, in fact, use the 101. But again, if you need to turn on all the firewall functions and fully load that 1 gig link, then I would say, yes, the 206 with the terabyte of storage would do it.
Okay. Eric, if that doesn't answer your question, please expand on it, or we can address that offline. Going to the employee count, is the number of users, is that a hard cap, or can, like the 101, can it go to 110, or, are they limited to the 99, 25, and 200 and so on?
No, they are not. So that's actually a good question, has been asked many times. There's no hard and fast limit on the employees. I mean, in theory, you could load 100 employees onto a 204 and it would chug along. But so there's no limits in there. This is basically, these are rules of thumb based on active observation of what happens and what sort of complaints we might get when they are actually deployed. So we do have, in fact, a customer with a 101 that has, at last count, 130 active users during the day. And it does hold up, but we're like, this is starting to get a little ridiculous. You really need a 206 in this application because it's the 101 is sort of just barely going through. Now, we have tested the 101, for example, with 160 Active Directory users. And at that point, it was a little slow, noticeably slow, but it still held up. It didn't crash. So we are confident, or we are reasonably happy recommending up to 99 for the 101. But we do know that it can go more, but just it's not a great idea. That's about it.
Okay. Next question would be, what is a use case for the 208, being that it's so large? Do we have any good applications or examples of 208 in action?
Yes, actually, there was, I can remember one, which was a church that apparently had not just video. I think I may have just briefly mentioned the church that has not just video streaming, but also 400 parishioners. And people noticed that every Sunday there was a big problem with the church LAN. And so the 208 went into that situation. So that's an example. I mean, a school would be another example. We don't have an example, an actual hard and fast example of the 208 in a school right at this moment. We do have schools with 206s, but yes, a school is a case where you would have 300 pupils, for instance, and today schools are all using online apps, and 300 pupils trying to do video online is a seriously large load for anything. So that's another case.
So is that cap at 99 and 200? Is that users or is that devices?
In a sense, it is users, because those are the easiest things to go count up. You can't really ask everyone to hold up their iPhones so you can count them. And so users is what we say, and we just kind of accommodate the fact that each user will end up with 2 or 3 devices just by default. Because if they got an iPhone in the pocket, as I mentioned, that's going to get on the network and is going to sit there and download Apple updates and chat with Facebook. Your iPhone has a life of its own, and frequently it doesn't need you to live that life. So in that, the applications we've seen like 60, 100, 130 users, those have been employees, and the number of devices have been more.
Okay. Another question was, let me get this. How many watts PoE can each port support on our switches? I think we had total watts, but do we have it broken down by the port?
Yes, all of the switches, with I think the exception of the very smallest switch, which is a little 8-port 60-watt total PoE, they all support PoE plus, which is 30 watts of PoE per port. Obviously, if you have a switch with a 410-watt power supply that has 24 ports, and every single port is sucking out 30 watts, that's not going to work. But a typical access point, for example, doesn't run more than about 7 or 8 watts, even at full load. The most I've ever seen being sucked out of an access point, by an access point, was about 9 watts when it was booting up. So you can plug an access point on every port, but if you have a device that is requiring PoE plus, then the thing can supply 30 watts on that port. Just at that point, you should look at the switch power budget and go, I'm not overloading the switch budget.
Okay. This wasn't a question, but this one came to mind just because you and I worked on this recently. But we had a customer with a project where they needed greater than 8 terabytes of storage. So what kind of custom capabilities do we have for storage on the new gateways?
That's an interesting and loaded question. Yes, engineering doesn't appreciate it if I start inventing products on the fly. Neither does marketing. Right. So the 208 in particular is designed. It's a honking great beast, and it is actually designed not just to accommodate the little enterprise class 2.5-inch drive, but also the large NAS class 3.5-inch drives. So in theory, that thing, I mean, the largest 3.5-inch drive we looked at were the big 20 terabyte beasts that you can get these days. So in theory, we could stick to those in there. There's no product like that because no one. I start questioning whether when you got 20 terabytes of storage that it's a small business anymore. But I suppose there are lots of small businesses with video editing who will want to store terabytes and terabytes, 100 terabytes of storage. So yes, in theory, we could expand it up to 20 terabytes of RAID on the 208. In practice, right now, we have 8.
Okay. So if that application comes up, give us a call. We'll figure it out.
Yes, there'll be a lot of gnashing of teeth from the back room.
Next question, Wi-Fi 6. Does the Wi-Fi 6 have better range, and can it be used outdoors, or is it only indoor?
That is actually an interesting question because we did a whole bunch of range comparison tests between the Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 5, and it was eye-opening how much expanded range the Wi-Fi 6 APs had over the Wi-Fi 5. So we set up a Wi-Fi 6 AP on an outdoor test range, basically a giant open field, no obstructions. And I was stunned because basically we were getting something on the order of 100 megabits per second throughput using iPerf tests all the way out to about 400 feet from an indoor access point with internal antennas. So that was a little mind-blowing because I hadn't ever seen that before with internal antennas and, an indoor AP. It's not supposed to go 400 feet, but I was consistently getting about 100 meg out of that. And of course, close up in the 25-foot range, it was well over 700 to 800 meg repeatably over that. I do have performance graphs. So the Wi-Fi 6 APs have significantly better range than the Wi-Fi 5. We expect that they should perform quite a bit better indoors than the Wi-Fi 5. Again, your mileage may vary, and we don't have enough mileage on these APs to have definitive conclusions, but they are way better.
Okay, and from an outdoor standpoint, would it hold up to outdoor use?
I would not recommend sticking a Wi-Fi 6 AP, an indoor Wi-Fi 6 AP outdoors anywhere because it has, yes, it does have better radios, but those radios are operating even closer to the margins of the threshold of pain than the Wi-Fi 5 APs. I mean, it is interesting how much you bend the laws of physics when you get to trying to shove 800 meg of data out of a MIMO radio. But and in any case, outdoors, the key there is really power, range, and durability, not just raw performance. So in most cases, the Wi-Fi 5 APs with their external antennas will have better overall range than a Wi-Fi 6 AP, an indoor Wi-Fi 6 AP, for sure.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or anything that we can address from the group right now? So as we're given that one last chance, I'll remind everybody that we will be making this available probably next week. And somebody did ask the question about making the slides available, and we will have those available as well to review. And as always, you can certainly give me a call or an email or support, and we can certainly help you out with pricing or, as Tom had mentioned, layout and design on your access points, that sort of thing. So it doesn't look like there's any other questions at this time. So we appreciate.
I did have one thing to add, which is if you need details about the new gateways, new APs, new switches, all that kind of stuff, we had a release 4.4 webinar back in December that has all the details. This was much more of an overview and a selection webinar. The actual technical details and other stuff about software features introduced in release 4.4, they're all in our release 4.4 webinar, which you should be able to watch since it's posted online. Sorry, Corey, go ahead.
No, no, you're fine. Okay, so again, with that, if there's any other questions, please feel free to give us a call or an email, and we'd be happy to address those. But we appreciate everybody taking some time to spend with us today, and we'll be talking to everybody very soon. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.